Welcome back to another Friday on the Damage Report. We're celebrating a little bit because of solving our technical issues. I wish you could have all seen the dance moves that Brett was just doing. They were outstanding. Speaking of which, Brett, thank you so much for being here with me today and suffering through the horrific noise that was my voice before we fixed the technological problems.
It was great. I loved it. Here's what we spared you guys from is we're in a war between Zoom and Skype, and each one has, much like any relationship, each one is terribly flawed in its own unique way. And the way that Skype is flawed is really coming in handy right now. And I want you to take that lesson and apply it to your own interpersonal relationships and go up to the people you love the most and tell them, thank you for being so terribly screwed up in a way that benefits me.
I do love taking a lesson from me having to dog sit. I hope that I can learn a lesson from the unfortunate experience that I had this morning, which maybe I'll talk a little bit more about later, but not right now. Also, if you're all very lucky and very good, you might get to see the very big dog that is sitting under my feet right now. Okay, with that, Brett, are you ready to get into this first story?
Let's do it.
All right, everybody. Trigger warning, Mike Johnson.
As Israel begins the next phase of its war, it's been kind of disturbing to us. I've heard Democrats suggest that there needs to be a ceasefire. Let us be clear. We've been very clear about this. There was a ceasefire. It was before October 7th, and Hamas broke it. And Israelis suffered unspeakable acts of evil, as you've heard even recounted here this morning. Israel doesn't need a ceasefire. It needs its allies to cease with the politics and deliver support now. And that's what we're doing. House Republicans plan to do that.
I really can't imagine a more horrific and callous way to talk about what is the most urgent humanitarian crisis in the world. But he did it. There he was, the newly elected Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, saying that Israel needs its allies to, quote, cease with the politics, which is so ironic considering what we're gonna get into in the details of what the Republicans were doing. But he's claiming that the Republicans are the ones who are gonna cease with the politics. Let's look at how that actually panned out in reality, where we live and apparently the Republicans do not. House on Thursday passed a bill that would tie $14.3 billion in military aid for Israel to domestic spending cuts. Republicans pushed through the measure on a mostly party line, not entirely though, a vote of 226 to 196, which is extremely rare for an Israeli aid package, which normally enjoys broad bipartisan support. Now, all but 12 Democrats opposed this legislation. There was also 2 Republicans who opposed this legislation. That was Marjorie Greene and Thomas Massey. Let's get into some of the facts of what was in this bill. A divided House on Thursday passed a Republican written bill that would tie $14.3 billion in military aid for Israel to domestic spending cuts and provide no money for Ukraine, defying President Biden and dooming its chances in the Senate. Mr. Biden has requested such a package totaling $105 billion, and White House officials said on Tuesday that he would veto the House bill because it was limited to Israel and contained partisan poison pill offsets, although he probably won't have to veto it because it's not going to pass the Senate. It's not expected to pass in the Senate. So what are those poison pills? What was included in this package? The bulk of the money in the GOP measure would go toward helping Israel replenish and bulk up its weapon systems, including $4 billion for the Iron Dome and David Sling missile defense systems. It also includes $200 million for the protection of United States personnel and evacuation of US citizens. It leaves out humanitarian aid for Gaza, which Mr. Biden has requested and many Democrats regard as crucial. Now, as we've previously reported, they're also using this package as a means to help out their wealthy donors and slash IRS funding. To pay for the bill, House Republicans have attached provisions that would cut billions from the IRS that Democrats approved last year and Biden signed into law as a way to go after tax cheats. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says doing that would end up costing the federal government a net $12.5 billion. I'm going to say that number again, $12.5 billion because of lost revenue from tax collections. Now, out of step with Mitch on Ukraine, but Johnson says it's coming in another likely horrendous package. A little more from that New York Times article. Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the minority leader, said on Tuesday that he and Mr. Schumer were conceptually on the same page when it came to linking aid for Ukraine, Israel, the southern border, and Taiwan. Mr. Johnson said on Thursday that he intended to attach legislation to deal with immigration at the southern border with aid for Ukraine. Brett, obviously this is dead in the water. Biden said he's going to veto it. Strong indications it's not going to pass in the Senate. But I can't get over the irony and the sheer hypocrisy of Mike Johnson to go and do that press conference where he says now is not the time for politics, while he is, which is an absurd thing to say on its face, but I mean, he's using this Israel aid package to scratch the backs of his wealthy donors and for Republicans to do the politics that they've wanted to do for a long time and defund the IRS.
Yeah, so they're back, baby. The Republicans are back doing the most Republican thing ever. It's this evangelical coalition that uses like people like Mike Johnson as a way to kind of placate their wildly Christian evangelical base, play to their best hopes for the world, which is an apocalypse thanks to my people living kind of near where all their nativity scenes are. And then after that, in the meantime, as they're all placated and all hopped up on dreams of the apocalypse and the return of the second coming of Jeezy Crazy, then at the same time, the Republicans who are pretending to be these fiscal conservatives are actually just shutting off the machine that gathers tax revenue to offset the deficit, which they say they hate. So they are just turning off various spigots that fund the government, that close the deficit, that reduce our, blunder into eventually being like a shell corporation for China or whatever you want to call it, in the ways that they conduct their business.
And it's funny because we need to cut spending Republicans, right? And that line of messaging is necessitated on their base, never peering behind the curtain, even a shred, to see what that actually means and how it plays out in reality, right? Because if you just look a little bit further into this, they're cutting spending, but costing billions of dollars and doing it. And it's funny the things that they say that we need to cut spending across the board, but then you hear everyone in Republican leadership talking about, well, we're passing these funding bills for defense. We also need to further fund border security, and that was the whole thing with the passing the budget. We need to slash the budget, but massively increase the money going to our southern border, going to ICE, going to Customs and Border Protection. It's such a disingenuous, line from them, and it just continues to amaze me that people buy into it. But of course, I have to be realistic about the fact that not everyone is degenerate in their participation and observing of politics as we are. Most people, it's a passive process. I don't know, any last thoughts before we get into the next section of this?
Yeah, like as there's more people that are kind of going away from the Republican neocon approach, right? There's a lot more people that are going to defect, and especially in the House of Representatives, you only need like 4 to 8 more defectors than the ones they already have on this funding bill to kind of take another step in the utter realignment of partisan politics in America. And I think, there's a lot of ways that the Israel-Palestine thing has been characterized, and usually I don't know how much of a difference anyone's really gonna make, but it helps to look at it certain ways, different ways at different times. And I don't know, it would take too long to kind of describe it, but like the most pro-Israel approach I have to a ceasefire is this. Like if you take yourself from the Israeli perspective and Hamas wants and the surrounding Arab nations want to wipe you off the map, the big mistake you can make is to overexert yourself in the wake of an attack that puts you at the moral in kind of at the moral high ground. And every passing day that Netanyahu does it, you eliminate some of the stuff that Johnson is saying here. Like in the wake of it, if you're Biden, like if in the counter attack to the incursion, the attack on October 7th, you have to go hug Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, just this is politically speaking, you have to support your allies in the time where they just had like, something per capita on the order of 29 11s. You have to do that. But the more that Benjamin Netanyahu systematically just disproportionately destroys Gaza, like you lose supporters, you lose the moral high ground, you lose the rhetorical war. And the more you do that, you're gonna lose dollar bills in support of what you've been doing. And the question is, does Benjamin Netanyahu be like, all right, give me 2 more weeks to destroy all of Gaza? Or do I just kind of say like, okay, 10 to 1, we did 10 times as many? Is that his rhetorical high ground to say like Israel's still strong?
Right, absolutely, and we're going to talk a little bit about the changing public opinion on supplying military aid to Israel, as well as support for a ceasefire that's absolutely impacted by, just the utter atrocities, the images, which are, I think, and maybe Israel overplayed its hand because they are not taking into effect the mass spread of the images that social media makes available, and the mobilization that has done, particularly to younger generations, and brought people who previously would have no knowledge on what's going on there into activism over this, convincing people to hit the streets. People who are not going to be hitting the streets are some of these politicians we're about to talk about, Democrats and Republicans alike. But as this passed in the House, this $14 billion aid package, again, full of poison pills, Democrats were stuck deciding how they were going to react to the legislation. Of course, we know plenty of Democrats who were always going to vote no on it out of principle of their support for the liberation of Palestinian people. But there are a lot of Democrats who always vote to fund Israel, and they had to make a decision here. So a lot of Democrats have called for a ceasefire or a humanitarian pause, which is nothing, by the way, it's nothing. But there are many who haven't. These strong advocates for Israel found themselves for the first time in their political careers voting against funding Israel, including Brad Schneider, a Democrat from Illinois, who put out this statement. In my worst nightmares, I never thought I would be asked to vote for a bill cynically conditioning aid to Israel on ceding to the partisan demands of one party. I also never thought that a day would come that I would be asked to consider voting against an aid package for Israel, our most important ally in the Middle East, and maybe in the world. And I don't think I could have rolled my eyes harder than I did while reading that statement, just because any other issue, any other issue that they have to vote for in Congress, of course, you're gonna see this type of partisan play. It's interesting because this is something that is almost never done with Israel. It enjoys such bipartisan support. But what you saw in that statement is the talking points that we're gonna see coming from the pro-Israel Democrats, which is politicizing the aid as well as conditioning the aid, as I mentioned, which isn't normally done. Now here's Representative Mikey Sherrill on that, as well as other necessary aid.
This is certainly showing the speaker's inexperience and I think lack of understanding of many of the ways in which Congress really works. So to have a, quote, pay for, or something that he wants to pay for the bill with that actually adds $12 billion to the deficit is pretty bewildering. Furthermore, it also displays a lack of understanding of how when you are fighting a counterinsurgency, you've really got to make sure you are taking care of the civilians. Our generals during Iraq and Afghanistan spent an inordinate amount of time worrying about how to get power to populations, how to get food and water to populations. And so the humanitarian relief part of this package is critical as well.
And that's why after the war in Iraq, there was 1 million dead civilians is because of all of the care that they took. I don't think that would be the example I would use when talking about taking care for civilians. But let's talk about changing perceptions, because this poll was recently released on American support for weapons as well as aid to Gaza. So this first, Republicans 65 to 30% and Democrats 49 to 43% support sending more military aid to Israel. Independents are divided with 46% supporting it and 47% opposing it. Voters 71 to 24% overwhelmingly support the United States providing humanitarian assistance to help Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Just a reminder, there was no provisions for any humanitarian assistance in what was passed, the bill that was passed in the House. There's also no aid to Ukraine. So here's the percentages on support for that. Democrats 77 to 20% and Independents 52 to 44% support sending more military aid to Ukraine, while Republicans 63 to 33% oppose it. Republicans 94 to 4%, Independents 71 to 24%, and Democrats 59 to 34%. All support providing more funds to help secure the United States border with Mexico. And I mean, one of the interesting things I think that we're seeing play out here, Brett, is that Mike Johnson's been very clear so far until he was elected speaker that he didn't want any support, any military aid going to Ukraine. And now his party has passed a bill not including that. Of course, he gave lip service to supporting Ukrainians after he was elected speaker. And he's saying that they're gonna that they will be passing something in the next few days to support Ukrainians. But you know, he's getting attacked from the far right of his party and also from now the more moderate wing of the Republican Party. I don't know how long this is gonna last.
He's got a razor thin margin. I think the only thing that affects any of his policy is whether he keeps the government open or not. I think that what Republicans want after their battle internally with all their politics is just not to do anything that's gonna make people start hating them more. And when they shut down the government, it reflects poorly on the Republicans, especially in this scenario. Right, and there's a lot in there about like Israel and Gaza stuff, but you know, yeah, that's my take on that question.
Did you want to just give final thoughts on the other stuff?
Yeah, I think I kind of said it earlier. Like, my position on the Israel Gaza stuff is like you ask everybody, they start yelling at each other. The extremes of both parties are like, there should only be one state, in my opinion. That state should be run by my people, and I just don't think that's tenable. The most people, after they yell at each other and argue what free Palestine means, they end up saying, yeah, let's go back to 1967 borders. Anybody who says that, like, oh, but what about the settlers who have a life there? Like, well, there were settlers in the Sinai Peninsula after the war, and they lived there for 15 years and they left. I just think that if you're Israel, if you're the Israeli government, they caught with being completely unaware and unprepared for the incursion that or for the attack or whatever that happened, and now they are overreacting in a way where the way that it works for people who aren't paying any attention and they stir from their sleep on this whole issue and catch it with the side of their eye is, oh wow, Gaza sucks. It sucks there. It's the worst place on earth. And if And it is run by Hamas, and Hamas wants to annihilate not just historically wants to annihilate not just every Jew in Israel, but every Jew in the world. But even with that ethos, you just can't. The optics look so horrible on you, Israel, if Gaza is this horrible. So what you do is the worst, most callous, the worst, most callous way to say it is like wipe out an entire people. But the most callous way to look at it is like, all right, you got attacked. The way to show your force in the area is to kill more people on the other side than killed you, and rely on America to show up when you're like, hold me back. And then everything goes back to normal. That is the callous way it has been for a very long time. And that disproportionate setup is the status quo. And everybody needs to go back to getting to a two-state solution, in my opinion, and do that now. And the ceasefire, like you did your thing, and you're gonna lose these numbers are just gonna get worse for Israel if you keep this up.
Yeah, and we're still seeing members of the US government saying that calling for a ceasefire is maybe the worst thing you can be doing and repugnant. So we'll see how much longer this is going to go on before the United States does eventually. I mean, I don't know, before their hand is completely forced and they have to do something. I would hope sooner rather than later, but we'll keep everybody updated on what's going on in Gaza. With that, we have to go to our first break, but stick around because we're gonna be talking about Trump's failed sons after this. I hope you're all happy. I'm satisfied with the massive dragon noise we got to make up for the baby dragon noise. All right, let's get into this next story. It's something I got to talk about with Francesca yesterday but we're getting back-to-back fail son days because Don Jr. was back on the stand today to testify in the New York civil fraud trial. But this time, he had his failed brother at his side, co-defendant Eric Trump. Now, we've said it before, but I think it bears repeating that the Trump organization has already been found to have committed fraud. This is a trial to determine the punishment. And if you didn't know that, maybe you don't watch TYT that often, but if you didn't know that, that's okay because Donald Trump and his Republican allies have put in a lot of effort to ensure that you didn't know that, right? That's been their mission, is to ensure that people don't know that they've already been found to have committed fraud, to make people think that this is the trial to determine whether or not they've committed fraud and not just a trial to determine the punishments. With that, take a look. Here is New York Attorney General Letitia James breaking down the testimony from Don Jr. and Eric Trump.
We just concluded day 22 of our trial against Donald Trump, the Trump Organization, and other defendants. Today, we heard testimony from Donald Trump's sons and co-defendants, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump. As a trustee of the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust, Donald Trump Jr. often made financial and business decisions on behalf of his father. He testified that he signed multiple documents confirming the accuracy of Donald Trump's statements of financial condition and the Trump Organization's compliance with loan terms. But those documents were not accurate, and he knew it. In fact, just a week after he was confronted with the truth that his father's triplex was 3 times smaller than the statement of financial condition said it was, Donald Trump Jr. continued to lie. He certified to the family's accountants that all the information he sent them was accurate, including the value of the falsely enlarged triplex. Next, Eric Trump took the stand and insisted that he had never heard about his father's statements of financial condition before our investigation. He told us his job was just to pour concrete.
And I can't wait to get into the Eric Trump bit because it's so funny. It's so funny. But let's get into some more details on this, starting with Don Jr., who continued to say he doesn't remember the specifics of several documents he was presented with in court. So from NBC News, he said that he relied on the accounting team, which included Alan Weisselberg, who was the company's CFO, and would ask all relevant parties if the information in the documents was correct, and then he would sign off on them. Asked about a loan document from bank, I'm signing it, but added, I'm sure I've signed dozens of these in my life as trustee. I feel like I have to say something about what I said yesterday on the show, because I saw some comments that misconstrued what I thought was pretty obviously tongue in cheek. I joked that the first thing I learned in law school was that ignorance of the law is the best defense. And that's obviously the defense being presented by Don Jr. I saw some people taking that seriously. It was a joke, not a defense. That is what he's trying to present as his, but not legal advice. Don't pretend you didn't know the law or say you didn't know the law just as a way to try to avoid liability. Okay, that being said, let's talk about Eric, who I think his situation was almost even more comical than Don Jr.'s. So he testified that he never worked on the Trump Organization's statement of financial condition and didn't know anything about it until this case came to fruition. From NBC News, he said, I was 26 at the time. I don't think I ever saw or worked on a statement of financial condition. I don't believe I would have known about it. Not what I did, but what he did do was get quite angry and raised his voice a bit as the Attorney General's office pressed him about his father's financial statements. So on to that, asked about a reference that he had made in a decade-old email that distribution of a summary of their personal finances should be limited. He said, you wouldn't want 1,200 people to see your personal finances. Asked if the document he was trying to limit was a statement of financial condition, a financial statement he testified he didn't know anything about. Eric seemed agitated and said, I was not personally aware of the statement of financial condition, and I did not work on a statement of financial condition. He was then shown an email sent to him by a Trump employee from 2013 telling him the employee needed information from Eric Trump to help put together his father's statement of financial condition. Asked by the Attorney General again if he knew about the statement, Eric said it appears that way. So what he's doing is taking on the second best line of defense, which is to lie on the stand, to lie on the stand.
Yeah, this is great. So, and I have not seen video of it. I don't think we have any. But essentially, in the trial, they say that between the two sons, you saw two different ways to comport yourself. You had Donald Trump Jr., who was just like, oh, I don't really remember. I don't think that was the case. Like cool, calm, collected, clueless. And then you had Eric Trump, who's like, come on, I just pour concrete. As if that guy's Rosie the Rivetering himself out like, we could do it, and just like tipping concrete at the job site. It is, and so essentially, yes, what ended up happening, Letitia James basically summarizes what I've also seen, which is that through a very difficult line of questioning, and I say difficult because it was apparently very difficult for the prosecutor to kind of get Eric Trump through all of it. By the end, Eric Trump did kind of cop to the fact that he doesn't just pour concrete. And if that was his position, he'd be admitting he is the worst executive vice president of any organization in history because he just doesn't know how much stuff costs and how much stuff is worth. It's so hilarious, almost as hilarious as the name of the Donald Trump Trust, which is the Donald Trump Revocable Trust, which is the most succession-y mind game you can play with your kids, where it's like, listen, Junior, at any minute, gone. I take the trust, my trust, not your trust. And I think that kind of mind game has created these like little weird monsters in his two sons.
And I love it. I love the knowing a little bit of the dynamic between him and his sons, like from reports about the time he slapped Don Jr. for not putting on a suit when he was taking him to a Yankees game, slapped him in his face in front of all of his friends at his college dorm, and then told him to put on a suit and walked away. Like the fact, I'm sorry, these are losers, right? That, the fact that the trust wasn't revoked is like astounding to me. How did they prove themselves to you, Donald Trump? What did they do?
Right, I mean, but it just stands. I've talked to actual human beings who are like, listen, who believe this. It is impressive when the children don't lose every cent that was given to them by their billionaire father. Now, they try really hard in this family, and I'm talking extended family, including Jared Kushner, who oversaw the literal worst real estate deal in history. But the difference for you and me is if we lose it, we just lose it. And for them, they just have a much larger runway and more leeway when they make a huge, horrible decision that daddy will not revoke the trust. He'll just slap them around a little bit.
Right, and unlike Jared Kushner, when we're in financial trouble, we can't just put a property up, list of property and have some member of the Saudi royal family buy it from us. It would be interesting for me to see, what amount of the trust is going to Don Jr.'s cocaine fund, and if it's possible to blow all that money on cocaine alone. And you know what? We'll keep you all updated, folks, on that. But we got to go to our next break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Ron DeSanctimonious and an issue that's near and dear to my heart, the mistreatment of migrants in my city of Chicago. So that when we come back. I want to read this really quick. Skittlebutt said cow farts are destroying the planet, and this dog's farts are destroying my nostrils because he won't stop. He won't stop. I'm sorry, I'm being tortured by this. All right, speaking of torture, let's talk about one Ron DeSantis, because Florida governor and Republican presidential candidate Ron DeSantis got in some hot water back in August at a campaign event where he said he was going to slit the throats of government officials. His exact words were, and imagine I say this in the least charismatic and most snore-inducing voice possible. On bureaucracy, we're gonna have all these deep state people. We're gonna start slitting throats on day one and be ready to go. You're going to see a huge, huge outcry because Washington wants to protect its own. But at the end of the day, this is a city that's failed this country. We're gonna start slitting throats on day one is what he said. And he got away with it for quite some time. Never was really asked to explain it or held accountable for it. But yesterday on Morning Joe, he was finally confronted about it by MSNBC's Willie Geist. Take a look.
So when you say something like you said in Rye, New Hampshire, that you want to, quote, slit the throats of federal bureaucrats, I know you didn't mean that literally, but do you have any pause or any regret about using that kind of rhetoric given our political climate?
No, because I think people knew it was a figure of speech. I think people want to see big changes to how Washington. Well, because you're being colorful at some of the stuff, but you need to bring in serious accountability.
Serious accountability, something that doesn't necessarily make me conjure up the image of Ron DeSantis. And I don't think I would describe saying slitting somebody's throat is colorful language, or maybe at least I wouldn't just say it's that, but it does play on something more serious, and we're going to talk about the stats on this in a minute. But we've seen an increase in support for political violence in this country, particularly among the right wing and Ron DeSantis's, as well as Trump's bases. And that's what Geist was attempting to get DeSantis to reckon with. Obviously, he did not in that answer. So Geist pushes him more clearly on this issue in this video.
And Governor, I take your point about accountability. I'm talking about the rhetoric. I mean, you see it. We all watched January 6th. We've seen what's happened since. We've heard all the threats to federal officials and again to people who work on elections, volunteers. Don't you think we should, as a country and particularly political leaders, turn down the temperature on things like that?
Well, look, I stand by what I said. I don't think anyone could reasonably have taken that and acted like I'm somehow advocating anything other than robust political process and robust political accountability. At the same time, we have divisions in the country. I think that's natural. We're a big, diverse country. But what I try to do is focus on the substance.
Again, because when I hear the term substance or substantive issues, Ron DeSantis is at the forefront of my mind. Now, I want to play one more clip because I think Geist made a good point at the end of this interview.
You can fight the fights, and I'm going to fight the fights very hard, but I also don't want to make enemies unnecessarily. I want people to work together when we can.
And Joe, the problem is we've seen if political leadership says things like that, there are people out there who take those signals literally and not figuratively as they're intended.
Right. And that plays into something we've been talking about a lot on TYT. We discussed it at length last Friday on the Power Panel, but that's the increased support for political violence. So let's talk a little bit about that from the Mirror. According to the annual American Values Survey, the acceptance of political violence as a means to address national issues has surged significantly, rising from 15% in 2021 to a startling 23% in the present study. The sentiment is more pronounced among Republican supporters of former President Donald Trump and those who believe the 2020 election was stolen. I want to say significantly more prominent in supporters of Donald Trump, almost 41%. It's almost half of Donald Trump supporters are like, yeah, we'll probably need to use violence to take back democracy in this country. And so I don't know, Brett, would you hear? We saw people chanting "Hang Mike Pence" on January 6th. There was a lot of violence that happened that day, and you have Ron DeSantis like trying to rile up his base by saying he's going to slit the throats of the bureaucrats in Washington, and then pretending that that's like some sort of language that everybody knows. You know, it's a commonly used phrase, slitting the throats.
Right. So this is just who sounds dorkier. Like here's the thing. All those reactions to people saying like, oh, you better tone down, or people saying you better tone down the violent rhetoric you're using. Whoever does that sounds like a dork. Oh my God, sticks and stones, but words are gonna hurt people. Like you have to acknowledge that you sound like a wuss bag, and the other side just sounds passionate, and they're always gonna have that. Like it's a difficult position to be in because, as you point out, like the people, regardless of whether I'm being like a dork ball for pointing out that you shouldn't say you should slit people's throats, even though we know it's kind of it's being used metaphorically. Everybody knows that. Everybody's interested, all decent people are interested in lowering the temperature of the rhetoric in America and upping the pressure. But that's a very difficult thing to do. I think that's just like a tough rhetorical hole to get into. I don't know why Willie Geist went there. What Willie Geist should be focusing on is, because everybody's mind's made up on that. I don't know, we're gonna kick their ass. What they should do is just point out what a dorkball Ron DeSantis is.
Yeah.
No, like yes, slit their throats is a figure of speech, but no one uses it that way. Everybody says heads will roll. That sounds like a normal person. I'm gonna get in there and heads will roll. That's it. But Ron DeSantis does that thing like when I think John pointed it out with Donald Trump talking about like grab him by the P word. It's like you're talking about it in a way that's not natural to how people, like even locker room talk doesn't sound like that. That sounds like saying boobs feel like a bag of sand from 40-year-old virgin. Like Ron DeSantis is trying to sound like a badass because he's fighting this imagery. This imagery of him wearing these boots and being in his little high-heeled sneakers, like this stuff going around. Him seeming like such a total wuss bag next to the like hardcore bro Donald Trump. That's the problem, and that's why he's flailing, and that's why he's failing.
I'm just picturing him like standing on stage, being like, "And we're gonna slit the throats of the bureaucrats."
Please clap. Please
doing that like evil, creepy smile, somehow worse than Ted Cruz. All right, but yeah, I'll stop being a hall monitor nerd and let's move on to this.
I don't call you a nerd. It's just it's like it's a tough position rhetorically to be in because people are like, oh, leave me alone.
Right. All right. Let's move on to this next story. Let's talk about something a lot more serious than Ron DeSantis. And that's that major cities, including my city of Chicago, are failing massively to provide adequate housing for the increase in asylum seekers that we've seen. Now, asylum seekers, including children, pregnant women, the elderly, disabled, are being forced to sleep on the floors of office buildings and police stations, and in some cases, in tents outside. This is happening in Chicago. It's now winter in Chicago. We got 2 inches of snow just a few days ago, and men, women, and children are being forced to sleep in tents outside. It is completely unconscionable. So let's get into some more of the facts from Associated Press. More than 20,000 migrants have arrived in Chicago since last year. Largely under the direction of Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott. More than 3,000 are living inside airports and police stations while they await shelter placements, including in Park District field houses, although some have moved into tents in adjacent streets and vacant lots due to overcrowding. The end goal, officials say, is permanent independent housing, but they are dragging their feet in making that happen. Now, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson has proposed winterized tents, like in New York, and more shelters to house the migrants who are sleeping in police stations, airports, and on the streets. Volunteer organizations who have provided the bulk of meals and clothing say they're now giving winter survival tips too. Layering clothing is a novel concept for most of the migrants who are used to warmer climates. Temperatures dip to the low 30s, around 0 degrees Celsius by Wednesday. Many are from Venezuela, where a political, social, and economic crisis has pushed millions of people into poverty. At least 7.3 million have left the country, with many risking a dangerous route by foot to the United States. And again, the conditions, particularly the economic conditions in Venezuela, the United States played no small part in exacerbating them and creating this crisis in the first place. Now, Gleisi Martinez is one of them and highlighted this struggle. Martinez, 27 from Venezuela, has lived for 3 weeks in a tent outside a Chicago police station with her 2 children, including a 9-year-old who is blind. They rarely leave the tent because of the cold. When the storm hit Tuesday, they went inside the police station, but it was too full. They walked to a nearby Target store for warmth. The snow caught us unexpectedly, Martinez said Wednesday. We didn't know it was going to snow. Johnson's administration has opened over a dozen more shelters since he took office in May. City officials have scouted locations for winterized tents, but details are sparse. Johnson estimates Chicago will spend roughly $255 million on the migrant crisis in 2023. Johnson told reporters Wednesday that his goal is to still get migrants into shelters by winter. He said, I'm working every single day to create spaces to move people out of police stations and do it in a way that is dignified. It's cold, but winter is not here yet. It absolutely is here. It was here on Wednesday when he made that statement. And Brett, I live by one of these migrant tent cities. It's despicable, the treatment of them. It's despicable that there are Chicagoans protesting them, not protesting the conditions they're being put in, but protesting that they are in their line of sight. It repulses me.
Yeah, it's you get a lot of not in my backyard folks. And there's a lot of rhetoric people throw around like, this is, everybody thinks they know how to be empathetic until they actually have to be. And some people, it's very simple. They're like, yeah, I just talked the talk. It's time for me to walk the walk and deliver on these promises. People who run a city that say that they're amenable to this influx of migrants, when they get an influx of migrants, should probably follow through on being amenable to that influx of migrants and handle it. I understand though, in the meantime, it is difficult to handle it. And so that is the trick of most politics. And I don't mean trick like in a disingenuous way, but that's the challenge of most of politics, where you have to find a way to message effectively and convince people with actual actions and message with words that are reflective of reality, and tell them that I am working hard to make sure that I can follow through on the promise that I made by saying that this place is open to that.
Absolutely, and I mean the charities are taking in, the churches are taking in a lot of migrants, as many as they can, but they'll be the first to, go and protest and say we are not a solution, right? We are a stopgap measure. The solution has to come from government, and I'm hoping that it will very soon. That is all the time we have for this part of the show, the first hour of the show, but hold on to your butts because the aftermath is coming up right after this. Okay, I'm gonna read your comments. I felt inappropriate. I almost started laughing. Well, Brett was making a very serious point because this dog under my feet farted so loud and so smelly. And I was like, Ray, don't start laughing at this moment. It would be so inappropriate. It would be so deeply inappropriate. It's like when Miss Kitty jumps up on my desk when I'm like talking about genocide and she jumps up on my desk and shows her ass to the entire world. I'm like, ma'am, now is not the moment.
The little cat butt that's just like.
Yep. She, such an exhibitionist, that woman. Okay.
Thank you for not, and thank you Skype for your noise cancellation software that didn't make it sound like while I was making a point about like, the Israel Palestine, it wasn't like, and there's another thing.
There is a video of AOC doing exactly that, and someone recording her goes, and it sounds exactly like a fart. And the right wing ran with it. And it was like, obviously she didn't fart. This is a recorded video that she uploaded. If she farted, she would have retaken. It wasn't a live stream. She would have done another take. The guy just happened to very unfortunately go, at him. And it just sounded so bad. All right.
And she farted. And the other part of it is that she also farted.
She also farted. All right, moving on from farts. Hopefully we don't have to talk about that again. Have to, as if I didn't bring it up. Ida Rodriguez has a book out. When last time she was on Damage Report with me, we got to talk about it, but it's here. It's called Legit Kid, and there are signed copies available now at shoptyt.com. Everybody, please go check out her book. She's wonderful. She discusses how she overcame hardship in her life, and changed her pain into laughter and used that pain to create laughter. It's wonderful. Get a signed copy, shoptyt.com. And speaking of Shop TYT, it is Member Appreciation Week. There's free shipping. Today is the last day. Again, shoptyt.com. Free shipping on orders over $75. Last day. So go to tyt.com/notice to find the code for members. It's also the YouTube channel members can find the code on the community page. It's also in the Discord. So we are sad that is coming to an end, but happy to say that this weekend Shop TYT also has big discounts for Member Appreciation Week. Members only this weekend, 30% off site-wide, shoptyt.com. Again, same way to find the code, tyt.com/notice, YouTube community page, also in the Discord for all of you. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start reading some of these comments. Boomer Dragon Cat says Republicans are being awful out in the open now. They don't even try to hide their true intentions. I'd say this has been true for a long time, but yeah, they just displaying their evil for the entire world. Moonshine Dragon says, those wanting war should be the first to donate their children to this Armageddon. I would say that they should sign up themselves. I see that's every comment under Ben Shapiro's post now, where Ben, join the IDF. Ben, you can sign up to join the IDF right now. Ben, you love war, you hate ceasefires. Ben, go fight for the IDF. Debbie says, Ray and Brett, happy Friday. Granny Dragon sub with Prime. Chipmunk sub with Prime. Big Leb with Prime. A lot of Primes today. Bander. All of you giving TYT your Bezos bucks. And Ladybug Dragon, thank you so much for subbing. Zell says war is a political matter, so yes, cease with the politics of war and leave Palestine alone. I mean, it's so annoying whenever a politician says, right, we need to put aside politics. It's part of your job, right? You're never gonna put aside the politics. Just stop saying it. Stop making me listen to you say it. It's so annoying. I mean, I don't know who that's for. Like, who believes that line, right? Because the people who are often like, oh, I wish people would stop talking about politics are also not the people who are gonna be watching your press conference. I don't know.
People, well, here's the thing. That's in there because people who don't quote follow politics, well, you'd be surprised how many people still watch local news, still watch, and they're frequently the kind of people like the boomery, like, oh, you're right. I never thought of it that way. This is a bigger deal than politics. Just the people who are inside politics, I think, grossly underestimate the extent to which people outside politics do get kind of fooled by the standard political cliches.
That's fair. That's fair. I guess, I sort of get a bit of that when I talk to my mom and my grandma, who sometimes get annoyed at me for talking too much about politics. I'm like, well, you guys are also talking about politics. Maybe you just don't realize it. All right, No Math Dragon said sending weapons to Israel and denying humanitarian aid to Gaza is exactly what Jesus would do. Oh wait, but see what they're doing is what Jesus would do. He apparently wants to have all of the Jewish people gathered in one convenient area so that when he comes back, to stroke off all of the conservatives who are the evangelicals who have been waiting for him, that he can annihilate them in one fell swoop. That's their goal, right?
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.